All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a code that can really make your heart sink. U0001. If you've ever had this pop up, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We're going to break down what your car is trying to tell you, what's causing it, and most importantly, how you can start to figure it out yourself. Ugh, you know that feeling, right? That sinking in your stomach when you're just driving along, minding your own business, and suddenly your dashboard just explodes with lights. You've got the check engine light, ABS, traction control. It's a moment of pure panic. It feels like the whole car is giving up at once, but it's often a sign of a very, very specific kind of problem. And that wild light show on your dash, it's usually tied to some really scary sounding symptoms. Your engine might just stall out of nowhere, or maybe it won't even start. Or worse, the car goes into what's called limp mode. That's where it slashes the power to protect itself, leaving you crawling on the side of the road. All of these things point to one root cause: a total breakdown in communication. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to follow a clear path to get to the bottom of this. First, we'll define what this code actually is. Then we'll dive into your car's communication network. From there, we'll walk through the diagnostic steps, starting with the easiest checks and working our way up. And finally, we'll talk about how to know when it might be time to call in a professional. So let's start with the code itself. The official, very technical name for a U0001 fault is high-speed CAN communication bus malfunction. Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know, but trust me, we're about to make it super simple. So what does that technical jargon actually mean? Well, at its core, the U000 code means just one thing. The different computers in your car have stopped talking to each other. It's not that a big expensive part has necessarily broken, but the lines of communication between them have been cut. Okay, so if the computers aren't talking, what network were they even on in the first place? To really get this, we've got to talk about the system that's actually failed, the CAN bus. The Controller Area Network, or CAN bus for short, is basically the digital backbone of any modern vehicle. It's this intricate web of wiring that lets all the different little computers, or modules, share information and work together as a team. And this is seriously the best way to think about it. The CAN bus is like your car's central nervous system. So that U0001 code, it's basically a pinched nerve. The brain, the main computer, is trying to send a signal, but the message just isn't getting through to the rest of the body. And these are the vital organs that are all hooked up to that nervous system. You've got the engine control module, that's the brain, and it absolutely has to talk to the transmission control module, the anti-lock brake system, and the body control module, which handles all the other stuff like your lights and windows. When they can't talk, you get chaos. All right, so where do we even begin to diagnose this mess? Well, like with any really complex problem, the number one rule is always the same. You start with the simple stuff first. And honestly, it does not get any simpler or more important than these two steps. Before you even think about complicated wiring or bad computers, you have to check your car's power supply. That means the battery, the alternator, and all the fuses and relays that go with them. Now, I know it might seem totally random, but seriously, everything in a modern car comes down to power. All those computer modules need a clean, steady diet of electricity. If your battery is getting weak or the alternator isn't charging right, that unstable voltage can literally confuse the modules, making them drop off the network and trigger that code. So, here's your magic number. Grab a simple multimeter and with the engine running, check the voltage right at the battery terminals. If you're seeing a nice steady reading somewhere between 13.5 and 14.5 volts, your alternator is probably doing its job. But if it's way lower or even higher, you've just found a huge clue. Okay, let's say your power supply checks out. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves a bit and move on to the next level of inspection. We're going to start hunting for a physical break in the network. And this right here, this is a super important piece of advice from pretty much every experienced mechanic out there. Before you jump to conclusions and assume some expensive computer died, you need to know that the vast majority of U0001 codes are caused by something way simpler, a problem with the physical wiring. So, this means it's time for a really good visual inspection. You're going to want to carefully trace the main wiring harnesses under the hood. Look for any wires that look frayed, melted, or are rubbing against a sharp piece of metal. Check that all those plastic connectors are clicked in nice and tight, and that there's no green, crusty corrosion inside. And you absolutely have to check the ground straps, those braided metal cables bolted to the car's frame. A loose or rusty one is a classic cause of all kinds of weird electrical gremlins. All right, but what if your power is good, and you've looked over every inch of wiring and found absolutely nothing? Well, then there's a chance the problem isn't the wiring itself, but one of the computers on the network. Yeah, this is the classic one bad apple scenario. A single one of these control modules can short out inside, and when it does, it can start screaming electronic gibberish onto the network. This basically drowns out all the other modules, so nobody can communicate properly. It just brings the whole system crashing down. Sometimes a failing module will actually give you clues you can see or smell. If you can track down where the different modules are, like the main engine computer or the ABS controller, literally give them a sniff. That distinct, burnt electronic smell is a dead giveaway. And if you're feeling brave and decide to open one up, you might even see a visible burn mark or a popped capacitor on the circuit board inside. So, you've checked the power, you've inspected the wires, and now you're at a crossroads. This is where you have to make a big decision. Do you keep digging yourself, or is it time to call in a pro? Here's a really good way to break it down. On the DIY side of things, you can totally handle the visual checks, the basic battery tests, and cleaning up some connections. But a professional, well, they have access to the next level of tools. We're talking advanced scanners that can see exactly which computers are offline, and they can perform specialized tests to pinpoint the problem without just guessing. And this right here is one of those key professional tests. With the battery safely disconnected, a mechanic can use a multimeter to check the electrical resistance of the network. You can think of it like checking the water pressure in a pipe. A healthy network should read right around 60 ohms. A reading of 120 ohms points to a break somewhere in the circuit, while 0 ohms means there's a short. It's a super fast test that tells them exactly what kind of problem they're hunting for. So, at the end of the day, fixing a U0001 code really just comes down to answering this one question. It's all about a logical, step-by-step process of elimination. By starting with the simple stuff like your power supply and visual checks, you can often find the problem yourself. But knowing when to hand it over for those more advanced diagnostics, well, that's the real key to avoiding a massive headache.